Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today for the Our Town Grant Program webinar, How to Apply and Prepare a Project Proposal. My name is Lynn McCormick. I'm the Director of the National Creative Placemaking Program at Local Initiative Support Corporation, the nation's largest community development intermediary. We are going to just do a little housekeeping to start. And if I can change the slides, here we go. Just want to let you all know that you're all muted. The best way to use this is to use the split screen option up in your right-hand corner there in the screen. We are closed captioning this. The recording will not include the closed captions. However, there is a transcript that will be able to be downloaded of this recording that will be posted on the website at LISC. At the conclusion of the webinar, you're able to ask questions using the Q&A box. Please send the questions through the Q&A box only and address them to the person that you'd like the question to be answered by. And again, this webinar is being recorded and will be available online through LISC next week, and I will be sending out a link to that recording to everyone who's registered. And with that, I'm going to turn the webinar over to Jen Hughes, the Director of Design and Creative Placemaking for the National Endowment for the Arts, and her amazing partner, Catherine Bray-Simons, the Design Specialist for the Our Town program.
Great. Thank you so much, Lynn. It's really wonderful to be here with everyone today. As Lynn mentioned, I'm Jen Hughes, the Director of Design and Creative Placemaking. And Catherine and I are going to do a little bit of back and forth to keep you engaged today on the webinar. I really just first want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us here today. Thanks to LISC for their wonderful partnership on the Creative Placemaking Technical Assistance Program and for hosting us here today to be with all of you. We are really eager to dive into specifics about the Our Town Grant Program in the spirit of making this funding opportunity accessible to your community. But first, I think it's really important to take a moment and acknowledge the challenging times that we find ourselves in. The COVID pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement has had enormous impacts and reverberations throughout the arts and cultural community and our world at large. And it's my belief that the creative life of this country holds enormous potential to imagine and steward a future that is more equitable and just, taking on racism and systems that have long oppressed people of color. Arts and culture holds potential to help local communities recover from the economic shocks of the pandemic, staggering unemployment, and social isolation brought on by this moment. Arts and culture isn't a panacea to these societal problems, but it is the soul and spirit of our humanity and has an important role to play in our way forward. The spirit of the Our Town program has always been about supporting cross-sector partnerships that help enable local communities to find that future and a way forward, acknowledging that arts and culture is central to driving positive change in place. We recognize how challenging it is for applicants right now today to look 11 months into the future and apply for a specific project in response to the Our Town program. I just wanted to assure you that the NEA staff, Catherine and I, are here to support you on that journey with this application cycle, and we want to stress our openness to creative placemaking projects and partnerships that might not yet be fully fleshed out. We specifically also want to extend the invitation for projects to support artists and cultural organizations in addressing the impacts of the pandemic, artists' unemployment, racial inequity, and other needs that might not be clear at this specific time. So when we talk about creative placemaking, we are talking about projects that integrate arts, culture, and design activities into efforts that strengthen communities. That may be by advancing local economic, physical, and/or social outcomes. And we'll dive a little bit more into that strengthening communities objective as we move through the presentation. Ultimately, the intention of Our Town is to lay the groundwork for systemic changes that sustain the longer-term integration of arts, culture, and design into local strategies for strengthening place. And this work is really happening in all places across the country. Since the launch of the Our Town program in 2011, the National Endowment for the Arts has made over 636 awards, totaling roughly $49 million. This work happens everywhere, in all different community contexts, working towards a diverse range of community goals. And we're excited to share the details of this opportunity here with you today. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Catherine, to pick it up from here.
Thank you, Jen. So as the specialist working with this program, Our Town, it's my pleasure to work with you all, prospective applicants, in assembling really competitive applications. And what we notice about those applications that end up being really competitive and ultimately successful in panel is sort of two things, this magical formula. First, these applicants are really successful at articulating the community need or goal that they're planning to address through the project you're proposing. And secondly, they're successful at describing a clear role for arts and culture in addressing that need or goal. And, you know, based on some research we've done over the past 10 years of funding these creative placemaking projects through Our Town, we've noticed a few kind of key themes where arts, culture, and design is really playing a unique role as a part of community development in these projects. So for example, arts, culture, and design kind of brings a unique value add to community development by illuminating forgotten or underappreciated local assets, helping to inject new energy around a particular local issue, place, or economy, helping communities imagine new possibilities for a place, new ways for achieving that future, and helping people connect across divides, both physical and social. So hopefully that's all sounding good and resonant with you, and you're thinking about creative placemaking. So with those ideas in mind, let's run through some of what the basics are to this funding opportunity. So Our Town makes grant awards ranging from $25,000 to $150,000. These are non-federal matching grants. And we fund projects that bring arts, culture, and design strategies to bear on community challenger goals in a new, innovative, compelling, even catalytic way, with an aim to influence economic, physical, or social outcomes. And the types of projects we see, you know, you'll notice the projects we fund are agnostic, really, as far as which artistic discipline, but we rather see these four kind of typologies of project. So arts engagement would be, for example, an artist in residence with a local government department. We see a lot of really interesting, innovative work happening there. Cultural planning is a project type, or that could include bringing artists or designers in to lead any type of community planning initiative where arts and culture may not have been a part of such an initiative before. Design, so engaging communities in design of, for example, a public space. Or gosh, you know, these days when I think about this era of social distancing, I can imagine a huge role to bring designers in to help advise cities and communities and approaches to accommodate social distancing requirements and keep everybody safe. And then arts and creative industry support. That's sort of our moniker for projects that are addressing artist unemployment. So really thinking about ways to engage a bunch of artists in coming online to help deal with some of these challenging issues Jen outlined at the top of the presentation. And we have also seen some great projects dealing with professional development for artists as entrepreneurs. We also require that applications come from a partnership comprised of a local government and a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And one of the two organizations in this primary partnership must have an arts, culture, and design mission. Sorry, arts, culture, and or design mission. Either organization in the primary partnership can serve as the lead applicant. We require that a letter of support from the partnering organization accompany the application, and that's a space for that partner to really kind of go into more depth, articulating their participation in the project proposed and their commitment. We also require a letter from the highest ranking local government official of the partnering local government or federally recognized tribe. There again, they are just really throwing the weight of their high office behind the project and helping to ensure that this project is set up for success. So Jen, I'll kick it to you to talk a little bit more about partnership, which is really so important in creative placemaking and important in this funding opportunity.
Fantastic. Thanks, Catherine. So as Catherine went through, I just wanted to rehash the definition of the two required partners to make forth the eligible partnership. So the first is this local government entity. When we're talking about a local government entity, the eligible partners include federally recognized tribal governments, county or parish, city, town, or village. We acknowledge there's lots of different typologies of local governments across the country, but this is a sort of rough list. And if you have a question about this, just shoot us an email at ot@arts.gov to vet your eligible partnership. It also requires a nonprofit 501c3 organization. So if it must be an eligible 501c3 nonprofit organization partner, if applying as the lead applicant, the organization must be able to demonstrate a 3-year programming history. Their 501c3 status must be established at the time of application. And it's really important to elevate that we are not able to support fiscal agents. So this nonprofit has to be programmatically involved and contributing to the project. So the other really important component of the Our Town program to really wrap your head around and grasp and think about as you're preparing your proposal is this strengthening communities objective. Really start here and formulate this first. This is part of the application that Catherine will go into in a little bit more detail, is really distinguishes our town at the Arts Endowment. So it's really critically important you're working towards one of these goals. And as you can see here, strengthening communities could be defined as economic change, physical change, social change, with really the North Star being this larger objective of systems change. So the idea is, over the long term, we're hoping to seed through our town projects, longer term systems change in the way that artists, arts and cultural organizations, culture bearers, and designers are really central to the way that community development happens on the ground and the way in which communities are strengthened with arts and culture being really central. So you want to be thinking about how you're going to work in partnership with that eligible partnership to really drive home arts, cultural, design activities that will help to advance any number of these goals. And you know, we've seen over the years this list of change goals really came about from ground up assessment of past Our Town grantees, self-reporting their goals and the outcomes that they were able to see from the Our Town program. I will just pause for a minute and sort of focus on this systems change outcome, because I think it is important for you to be thinking about what do we mean by systems change? You know, perhaps not within the 2-year grants of the Our Town project, but sort of your guiding North Star and what you're working towards is hopefully to improve the community capacity to sustain this way of working with arts and culture as central for the way that they strengthen communities. It might involve creating new partnerships with other sectors that live beyond the timeline of the grant. It could include civic and institutional leadership that is sort of open to a new way of working. Could be replication or scaling of innovative projects in the future, longer term funding to ultimately support creative placemaking, maybe beyond the life of the Our Town grant, as well as it could manifest itself in permanent staff positions that are dedicated to supporting this way of work. So that's sort of the North Star that you should be thinking about as you conceive of your Our Town project proposal. So now that we hit on those two basic concepts of partnership and the strengthening communities objective, I'm going to send it back over to Catherine to walk through the mechanics of how to apply.
Thanks, Jen. Okie doke. So the good news is, good news first. Everything you need to know about the application process is spelled out on our website and the guidelines in very meticulous detail. On this slide, you see a big fat red arrow pointing to that link, how to prepare and submit an application. That is going to give you an overview of all that's required to get this application to the NEA, and even more detail spelled out in those two links below, the Part 1 and Part 2. So Part 1 is submitted via Grants.gov. This you can think about as sort of paperwork you need to do to signal to the federal government that you aim to submit a funding application. Word of warning, Grants.gov has instructions on its site, but I want to encourage you to really stick to the instructions as they're spelled out on arts.gov on our guidelines pages, because we've seen people kind of get lost in another thread of instructions on arts.gov. That can be really confusing and problematic. So follow the instructions as they're spelled out on our site. And what you need to have in mind is, one, being sure that you've got a registration or renewed and verified account at grants.gov, and also making sure that your account with SAM, the System for Award Management, is set up and or in good standing. These two pieces will enable you to submit the SF424 form via grants.gov. This piece needs to be submitted by August 6th. That's the deadline for Part 1. So we urge you really just get started on these very kind of bureaucratic steps ASAP. If you've never applied for an NEA award or a federal award before, they can be cumbersome. So get your arms around it, get started now. Then we can look at here on the application calendar, just in the scheme of things, you'll see we want to see you really getting started on Part 1 early. If you start before July 16th or July 27th, respectively, for those two kind of subsets of Part 1, if you encounter a snag, some issue with getting that work done, if we see you started early and in good faith, you might at least have some recourse to potentially get an extension with us if it turns out that you are unable to make that August 6th deadline. So another reason to get started early. And then looking ahead to Part 2, which is completed via the NEA's, the Arts Endowment's applicant portal. So Jen, can we hit the next slide? So this is where you're going to really submit your full application that includes your narrative and your budget and your listing of the individuals and partners who are going to be involved. This is where you're going to upload your work samples and your required letters of support. Again, the applicant portal opens August 11, and you are enabled to access the applicant portal only with credentials that are generated with your successful completion of Part 1. Again, really thorough instructions for submitting Part 2 are available on our website. You can begin preparing your responses for Part 2 now. If you want to just go ahead over to our guidelines page and click that where you see the arrow here, that Part 2 submit to the applicant portal PDF, that's got the really thorough instructions and allows you to preview all the questions and prompts that are part of the Our Town application itself. The cover of that PDF looks like this. You're looking to download a document that looks like this. Okie doke. We thought now we would just kind of give you a sense and walk through the the content that is requested of you as part of the Our Town application. So the first section is organizational information. This is where we are asking you to tell us about yourself, the lead applicant, and the primary partner organization. Remember that they meet those eligibility requirements, right? The 501c3, partnering with a department of local government. Next slide. Under project information, this is where you're going to tell us kind of about the timing and your planning around this project. So what are the key dates and activities corresponding to dates or a general schedule? Some background, kind of tell us why now, where is this project coming from? What do we need to know about your community to understand kind of the context from where this proposal has arisen? The project description is really the activities that you plan to undertake. Then we have a section requesting you to describe really the works of art for projects that are really endeavoring to do planning work. We would consider the plan the work of art, quote unquote. A better name for the section would be deliverables. So think about the section as where you're describing deliverables, which could include works of art or a plan. Hit the next slide, great. So the project objective maps to those strengthening communities objectives that Jen had really discussed. So, and again, this is the section of the application that really sets the Our Town program apart from other funding opportunities at the Arts Endowment. So tell us how it is that the project activities you've described are really going to, in your view, affect social, economic, physical, and or systemic change in this community. We have a section for you to tell us about your performance measurement. So how are you going to make this project kind of accountable to those goals? What kind of evaluation are you thinking about? Who do you plan to be working with? And what is your plan for engaging that community? And I'll stick on this community engagement piece for just a moment. This is really important for our panelists in kind of deciphering a competitive application from a good one. So really competitive applications have a really sensitive, careful, sophisticated thought about how they plan to go about working alongside and empowering the community and target beneficiaries that they're looking to work with. So who is being involved in conceiving this project? You know, who is at the table now as you think about what to apply for? What are your decision-making opportunities along the way where community can be in control? Really just, this is a space for you to share your strategic thinking with us on community engagement. And, you know, especially now, I think it's worth checking yourself, you know, is the business as usual approach to community engagement the appropriate one in this era of social distancing requirements where it may not be so easy to get everybody into a room for a meeting, and then, you know, digital divide considerations, which really can end up leaving people out of interactions that are happening online, and just the crucial importance of equitable representation with regard to race and other important considerations when you're mapping out who are our stakeholders in this project. You know, artists can help you along these lines. Folklorists can help you along these lines. Culture bearers can help you be creative along these lines where you may really feel like you don't have many resources to bring to creativity around community engagement. We would fully expect to see costs relating to a creative and high quality community engagement plan to show up in your project budget. So keep that in mind. And speaking of the project budget, we can move to the next slide. So Again, you need to make at least a minimum request to the NEA for $25,000. And if you're making that minimum request, that means you're in your project budget going to be showing us $50,000 in project costs. So think of the $50,000 in costs as showing us what you plan to spend the NEA award of $25,000 on, plus the required one-to-one match of $25,000 from another non-federal source. These costs, these are 1 to 2 year projects, so the budget reflects that 1 to 2 year project period. Again, we fully expect to see artists being thoroughly compensated for their contribution to this work. And I guess one other note about match, I see this question a lot. Match does not need to be secured at the time of application. It's really kind of over the project period that we need to see the match being spent on costs incurred. And, you know, we just recognize that match sources are going to be probably a unique challenge in this FY21 cycle. It remains a requirement, but be creative and do the best you can at thinking about what could prospective sources for match be, you know, as far as you can tell now, 11 months out from the project. Again, those sources do not have to be secured at this time. You should mind the link on the guidelines to the page where we describe what we do not fund. It's worth noting we do not fund construction, renovation, landscaping, capital costs, purchase of land or facilities, this type of thing. We can support pre-development costs around, you know, an architectural or design or landscape design fees that will impact the physical environment. Some people ask, you know, since we call out specifically social, economic, physical change, how is it that we expect these awards to impact physical change when we don't fund construction, renovation, or landscaping? You know, it's the pre-development and community engagement and design work that we can support. We don't support recurring programs or general operating. In these projects, you know, that are catalytic and one-time, that are really meant to sort of transform the way that arts and culture plays a role in community development in your community, we can cover staff costs as they correspond to this project, but we don't fund general operating through our town. We don't fund activities that are not tied to some strengthening community's objectives. Again, that section is what makes our town unique at the Arts Endowment. So if you're really looking to fund a theater program, that is probably an application better suited for the theater discipline under Grants for Arts projects. So we have other opportunities for projects that don't correspond to a type of community development outcome, but our town is probably not the place for you. Projects where, the arts are not central, again, we're the National Endowment for the Arts, so make it clear what is the role arts, culture, and design is going to play in your proposal. We don't fund sub-granting or re-granting. We can fund fees for service, so if you're working with partners who need to be paid for their contribution, just don't think about the funds you'll allocate to them as a grant, think about them as a fee for service. The same would go for artists that you want to contract with, right? You wouldn't be sub-granting to those artists to play a role in your project. You're executing a contract with them for purposes of this funding opportunity. We don't support costs that would bring a project or a facility into compliance with federal grant requirements. The next section is project participants. And this is where you can tell us about key individuals, artists, consultants, designers that you're hoping to engage in this project. You may not yet know who exactly you want to work with. Maybe you're planning to undertake an RFP process to solicit proposals from artists to, say, develop a facilitation plan for a new planning initiative. So in that case, that's fine if you don't have specific artists identified. You can tell us about the types of artists you plan to work with. What qualifications would you be looking for? What parameters would you be setting in that RFP? What role can the community play in helping you to select those individuals that you want to work with? So really there, it's sort of what is your plan for engaging the right people if you don't yet have people identified. And the very same goes for partners. You have space to tell us about other partners and stakeholders and organizations that are involved in this project. That can include for-profit organizations. And again, if there are committed orgs, that's great, list those. If there are prospective orgs, that's also fine. You're welcome to include those as well. Next slide. Programmatic activities is really not a section to belabor. It may look overwhelming at first, but this is really just a space for our grants office to help ensure that the organization has been in existence and operating programs for at least 3 years. That's just an eligibility requirement. And, you know, panelists sometimes look at it just to get a sense for, is there the necessary experience to manage an arts and culture project in this lead partnership? And then items to upload, last but certainly not least, we require work samples. Again, similarly to what I was saying about to engage artists or consultants you may not yet have identified. You know, with work samples, it may be that you're undertaking a way of working and engaging arts and culture that you've never done before in this community. So you may be thinking, well, shoot, we don't have any images that reflect what we're embarking on, you know, in this new project. That's fine. Likely though, you've got some mental picture, some examples out there in the world that you are drawing upon to kind of help you and inspire you. And images and ideas from those sources of inspiration would be a great help to panelists in assessing artistic excellence. So this is a space for you to submit images of the types of artists you'd like to work with, or examples from the kind of, say, cultural asset mapping process that you would like to undertake in your community that you've seen happen elsewhere and you think really reflects the level of quality that you are aspiring to. Also in this section, statements of support. So this, again, is a requirement. This is where you'll upload the letter from the highest ranking local government official. That's really up to you to figure out who does hold the highest office in our local government. Local government can go as high as county or tribe. So yeah, for example, a city or town, the highest ranking official may be the mayor, it may be a city manager. Give them a call and simply ask them this question: who should be completing this letter? Same goes for the county or tribe. And then a statement of support, again, from your primary partner, where they are letting us know on their own letterhead, yes, we're committed to this project, we're aware of this application, we're excited to play a role, and XYZ, you know, allow them to share a little bit their specific feelings and thoughts and plans in this partnership. Avoid a templated response. Panelists can kind of smell that from a mile away. And we sometimes hear critique along those lines during the panel process. Next slide. Okay, so the earliest project, well, let's look again at just the application calendar. Awards are announced next spring, so April 2021, and your earliest project start date is July 1, 2021. So just with that date in mind, that sort of costs incurred on or after July 1, 2021 belong in your project budget. Costs incurred before that date do not belong in your project budget. And in your narrative, If you want to tell us about activities leading up to what will begin happening starting July 1, that's fine. Just make sure you're being clear, sort of like before the funded project, phase 1 will occur, and that includes XYZ activities. And then starting at phase 2, which begins July 1, 2021, we'll embark on phase 2 and phase 3, and that's what we're requesting support for. I'll kick it to Jen now to share with you how it is that these applications will be reviewed.
Thanks so much, Catherine. I also think it's just probably worth noting that if you've applied to the Our Town program in the past, hopefully you will notice some streamlined elements of the application. We've tightened up the character count, condensed some questions just to make it a little bit more accessible to you. So hopefully you'll note those changes and pay attention to them this year, just to make sure you're staying within the more limited character count that we have as part of the application. So once we receive your application, I thought I would just briefly speak about the review process and how the grants are adjudicated at the National Endowment for the Arts. So we host roughly 30 to 40 panelists every year who review the Our Town grant applications and make recommendations to the NEA staff as to which projects should be put forth for funding and support. And it's important to emphasize this, you're really writing to your peers. We have a really incredibly diverse group of folks that serve on the Our Town review panel process, everyone from artists to performers to community development specialists, folks who work within local governments, folks that work in other fields of community development, affordable housing, city planning, really a very wide range so that we are able to have great expertise in reviewing these diverse applications across the board. It's also worth noting that we host panels based on community size. So those applications we receive from urban metro areas are reviewed against other applications from urban metro areas. We typically have a couple mid-sized city panels as well as a couple panels that are specifically focused on rural or small communities and tribal communities. And we do that to make sure that we have, we're sort of comparing similar-ish community context sizes to each other so that, a small town of 400 people isn't being compared vis-a-vis Los Angeles County. But also we feel it's really important to make sure that we have the expertise on the review panel that knows what it's like to work in that specific context, whether it be rural, small town, tribal, urban, or somewhere in between that mid-sized city area. So what are they looking for when the panelists are actually reviewing the grant proposals? Well, at the NEA, we are legislatively required to adjudicate all of our grants based on 2 review criteria. The first one I'm going to talk about is artistic merit, and I'll dive then into artistic excellence, and both are equally weighted. So I always advise folks to really print out the review criteria. We have it clearly marked and called out on our website so that you are consistently thinking about the review criteria as you draft your application, because this is what panelists are going to use to assign your application a score. So first, artistic merit. This is kind of a pretty significant catch-all bucket, really assessing quite a few different things. One, the potential to advance local, economic, physical, and/or social outcomes. So back to that strengthening communities' objectives. The potential of the project to ultimately lay the groundwork for systemic change. The potential to support artists. Keep that central in your application. Level of community engagement in planning for and participating in the project. The strength of the partnership between the required partners as well as partners beyond that requirements, if there are those. The potential to reach underserved populations, as well as sort of good grant mechanics as the project budget and timeline really make sense for what is being proposed? Do they align? And can the panelists have confidence that the project put forth is proposed thoughtfully and can be carried out with the resources allocated to it? So on the other side of the review criteria, equally weighted, is artistic excellence. And this is really referring to the quality of the artists, arts or design professionals, arts or cultural organizations, community development organizations, the works of art or services that a project will involve. And it's key to note here, this is as appropriate for the community in which the project takes place. So it's really, this review criteria is looked at through the lens of context, certainly. So as Catherine alluded, some places where our review panelists might be seeking to assess artistic excellence would be in the work samples, whether it be the aspiration or past work of the organizations or partnership that's being proposed. It might be in the artist or designer selection process or the list of key organizational partners. So just keep that in mind that this is the other equally weighted review criteria. We often get the question from folks out there that are looking to apply, well, how do we get a sense for what's been competitive in the past? And I think it's really important to note on our website, arts.gov, you can actually click a button to see past grantees. It takes you to this grant search. We also have a direct link here on this slide so that you can see the entire body of our town over the last 10 years if you'd like, or even perhaps some of our more recent grantees. So we have that nice big red arrow that's pointing to the category that you're going to have to select, which is our town, and you can actually export a list of project descriptions from the entire program, particular years, within a particular geography, et cetera. So we certainly encourage folks to seek some inspiration there as well. I think it's really a testament to the diverse body of work that's been supported in this program in the past. But what is that sort of uniting theme is that these projects were focused on strengthening communities based on a really thoughtful working partnership between a local or tribal government and at least one nonprofit 501c3. I'm going to toss it back to Catherine just to kind of close this out by sharing the wonderful examples of grantees that are in our 10th anniversary cohort for our town that we were pleased enough to be able to announce publicly roughly a week ago.
Thanks, Jen. So in Minneapolis, in the historically Black Near North neighborhood, Capri Theater is going to be working with the City of Minneapolis Office of Arts, Culture, and Creative Economy to train youth to become cell phone filmmakers, equipped to tell the story of the community's vibrant cultural assets and to enact a more equitable media representation of Minneapolis residents. Thrilled for that project, cannot see what these folks come up with. Documentary filmmaking from one's phone. Important. In Louisville, Kentucky, Ideas X Lab will be working with the city planning and public works agencies there to stage the Unknown Project. So this will be a series of arts-driven, multidisciplinary experiences that will contribute to a citywide initiative meant to confront and understand the local history of slavery and stories of enslaved people. Creative Sonoma, that's Sonoma County and Santa Rosa's Downtown Action Organization in California will be engaging artists to install public art installations that support the transformation of streets and sidewalks into public spaces that accommodate social distancing requirements, establishing a replicable model that supports public health and economic activity as part of ongoing COVID-19 recovery. This one I just want to point out, in their original application, they had submitted a proposal for public art reflecting on wildfires in the region. But following the sort of outbreak of the pandemic, they quickly realized, we've got, a much more pressing need for these funds and a really vital role for art to play as we as a community really kind of figure out how can we continue our economy. The city of Santa Rosa has decided to close some space to traffic and allow shops and restaurants to spill out into that open air space to accommodate social distancing and make everyone safe. And there has been a period where we were able to accommodate that type of change in light of the pandemic. And so we just really want to applaud Creative Sonoma for their quick, nimble thinking and their imagination around how to really dovetail arts, culture, and design into the current pressing needs in this time. And needs in these communities are going to continue evolving. And so we're thinking of you all as you assemble these applications now. Artists Working in Education is an organization in Milwaukee, and they're planning to work with the health department there to develop art making workshops and public art installations, youth-focused programs at some local healthcare clinics to ensure that children and families are supported in accessing the healthcare they need. And, you know, this project is being carried out as it was conceived almost a year ago. But, you know, in this case, it's really vital. I'm getting emails from my pediatrician all the time about how important it is that our kids keep getting vaccinated. So we're really thrilled for that project as well. And in Savannah, residents are going to be conducting in-depth analysis of local health disparities through creative writing and storytelling workshops with Deep Center in partnership with the city's Cultural Resources Department. So we want to applaud and commend all 51 of these fantastic organizations and partnerships as they embark on their fiscal year 2020 projects with our town support. Congrats to them. Back to you, Jen.
Fantastic. Thanks, Catherine. As we're teeing up the question and answer section, we just wanted to put out there a couple other resources for you to consider. We've been pulling together a list of COVID resources on our website at Arts.gov, the first link there. There may be other opportunities or programs that are particularly relevant and meaningful to you at this moment. Catherine highlighted at the outset, we also have other NEA grant opportunities. We have a Grants for Arts project deadline coming up, as well as a research deadline later in this year. So I would just encourage you to scope out those other grant opportunities as well. If the Art Town program feels like a good fit for what you're putting forward, that's fantastic. We hope to see your proposal in that, but you might also check out what those other opportunities look like. And lastly, we have a fabulous collection of how to do creative placemaking webinars up on the LISC website. Our partner organization produced these, a series of 6. So we would encourage you to take a look at them. You know, there's particular webinars that are really focused on setting up and structuring partnerships, as well as thoughtful community engagement. So those are other great resources to tap as you're thinking through your project design and application. So with that, we'll move into questions, but we want to make sure that you know that we are available to answer your questions via email at ot@arts.gov. Catherine and I are sort of manning that inbox, making sure that we are responsive to applicants with particular questions. If you have a particularly nuanced question about your partnership, that's a great spot to share that. I will also say we have wonderful FAQs on our website, so please spend a little bit of time just checking through all of those great materials. So fantastic questions. We're getting ready to close out the webinar. We just want to thank all of you for joining us here today and for taking the time to learn more about the Our Town program for the fiscal year 2021. We also want to make sure that it's on your radar. We'll be hosting another webinar on July 1st at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, today we really moved through the mechanics of applying to the Our Town program. This will be quite different in offering up the space for inspiration for prospective applicants, just to include some speakers who have some really big visions and thoughtful ideas in in this moment in time that we find ourselves in. So we look forward to sharing out those ideas, lifting up some great speakers for you to draw some inspiration for projects in the time of COVID and the pursuit of racial equity. So with that, thank you again. It's been wonderful to go on this journey with you through this webinar, and we wish you well.